Hello everybody and welcome to VFR. Today we are here on the ground in Teterboro, New York. Going to take us through a flight in one of my new favorite planes for Microsoft Flight Simulator. A plane I think that is worth a shot if you're at all interested in private aviation type. The Flysimware Lear 35. As you see, we're on the ramp here at Teterboro with covers and stuff on still, so we're still getting the airplane ready to go. But what we're going to do today is fly a group of charter passengers from Teterboro here on a quick flight down to DCA, Reagan National. Should be a good flight. Let's get into it. So as we walk around the plane, let's take a look at what the Lear 35 is. Obviously, it's a jet. It's a fast, high-flying private jet. We're going to take this up, above flight level 400. And it's designed to go fast and carry 7-8 people and get you where you're going in a hurry. It comes from Learjet, the famous company developing private jets, originally founded by Bill Lear. And this is kind of the medium size of the plane. There's a smaller one. There are larger Learjets in this series, but a good kind of average, same scale, maybe a little larger than our Citation CJ4. I think it's a bit larger than that. But it does feel, I think it's the first plane that really feels like a good kind of classic private jet. Makes me think of 70s, 80s businessmen and suspenders and stuff. We do have these wonderful tip tanks here on the side that are going to be carrying fuel for us. And it is a T-tail with a low gear. But again, other than that, pretty, I don't want to say standard. You have this funky cockpit door. But it is very much through and through a Learjet. And so hopping into the cockpit of the Lear 35A. And Flysimware has done a great job with this. Again, I really like it. I like the style. It's very similar to the Cessna 414 that they've done. And if you like that, I think you'll like the art style of the Citation. I've found that there are some art styles I gravitate more towards, being mostly Flysimware A2A stuff. I'd say the big thing with these is the gauges are shiny. Doesn't bother me, but it definitely there's glass there, you can see it. But other than that, this is it's an interesting kind of panel layout for a big fast jet that you might fly. We've got more of an analog six-pack, no glass cockpit, no fancy G3000 to help us out. You're flying with an analog kind of steam gauge six-pack, although these are, again, not ancient. They're pretty advanced, especially for that level of capability. Then we have dials for the engines too, so again, if you like the dials and stuff but want to fly a jet, I think this is probably a really good plane for you. If you like a big screen, you don't have that option on this airplane, so probably not for you. We're running with the PMS GTN 750. Today you can run it with the 530 or the TDS GTN 752. So there's some different configurations which you can configure in the tablet, which is a nice addition too. Tablet works well. And we have, you can control all the external stuff, cabin doors, and we have a payload manager, fuel weight and balance page, which is very helpful. This is a good weight and balance page for setting things up. Checklists and then options here. So again, all in all, it's a really good package if you're into that, and lots of switches. But getting this airplane up and running, it is not rocket science, and because you don't have an FMC in this thing, you're not spending a ton of time programming the box either. So as long as you know how to work your Garmin of choice, you can get up and going pretty fast. All right, so we're pretty much ready for start here. I am going to go ahead and get these engines fired up, and then we'll brief the route and get this thing in the air. The nice thing about this plane is you do have an autopilot. It works well, but it's not a click and forget. So when we get up in the air, we'll have to fly it. There's no clicking LNAV and taking our hands off. So let's go ahead and get this engine fired up. We've got the engines in the idle cutoff now. We have all of our stuff on. We can turn hydraulics on. All of these look good. So, for the engine start, it's pretty simple. We're going to do a similar thing with the most jets. We're going to turn on right gen to the start position. We're going to wait until we observe the turbine speed and fan speed come on up. towards that green arc, and then once we see that rise, we will bring the throttles out of idle cutoff. Let's go ahead and do it. Beacon light would be good too. And the sounds are good here too. We should maybe close the door, but... So that's come up and stabilized. Let's take it out of idle cutoff. And we're good to go. Now you can operate the door too from the back if you want to, so that's a nice little helpful feature. You got to pull some levers and latch it and lock it right, which is always appreciated. And the clacking that we hear that I'm going to turn off actually for this video, but I'll generally leave it on, is our N1, N2 clacker. And that just keeps track of when the engine's changing. It makes an audible click so that you can hear it, but I don't think it's going to be good on the video. Now with one engine going, we can bring that off and back up to right gen. And we'll start the left engine. Same procedure. All right, now that we've got both engines going, let's talk through our route for today. In Navigraph, we're here at Teterboro, just outside of New York City. And what we're going to be doing is flying south on the Teterboro 4 down to Biggie, which is basically just going to be a vector off of the runway. So we're going to get an initial climb for runway 19 today. And we'll see what that initial climb is here. Heading 195 until 900 feet, and then a right-hand turn for 280 to climb and maintain 2,000. That will be the trick in this airplane, since it's not going to do it automatically. From there, we're going to go out to Biggie, which I think is on the chart. Yes, right here is Biggie. So we can actually use the nice new... well, that's not very nice, but we can undo again. It's a nice idea. Let me underline it. Biggie here. So essentially what we're going to do is here, here, and that. Something along those lines. Then once we get down towards DC, we've got a top altitude of 240 today. We're not getting very high. We're going to fly to the Medina VOR, and then we're going to descend and cross Clipper at 12,000, and then the Baltimore VOR at 10,000. We're getting the, looks like the river visual today, runway 19, so we're going to be going up here to the north and then coming down over the Potomac. All right, final checks before we get started. I just like to take a, and I'm not an expert in this airplane, I'm doing things wrong. There's a lot of nuance you can get into with the engine settings, your takeoff performance, your V speeds, which you can look up in the tables provided with the manual or with older manuals. I don't think there is a manual for this airplane, but they did make it for P3D, so you have a lot of the same information here. I'm going to bug with our old-fashioned speed bugs here, and we'll hold it right at 120, right at 135, and then about 160. Again, you can rough this in. Your V2 should really be about 15 plus, we want to bug 15 plus V2. And we'll rotate somewhere around 130. Again, you can look this up in the tables if you really want to, but it's not going to do it for you. So that's just a general little rule of thumb that I've been doing. We can also turn on our yaw dampers. We'll engage that off the ground. Want to make sure we get trimmed out. We want to bring the pitch trim down into the takeoff arc there, right around 5. I like to put it, depending on how we're loaded. And then we're going to preset our altitude. We're climbing 2,000 off the runway here. So actually, if I set my altimeter 29901, and we want to set our altitude at 2,000, and we will arm altitude select there. Our initial course was 195. With a turn to 280 afterwards. So what I'm actually, as I'm doing this, thinking, and I go the long way, is perhaps we should bug Heading 280 with the course. And then we'll fly it in heading mode. Heading 195 off the runway. Now, we are flying with a GPS today. You can just ignore your GPS and go with radio navigation if you so choose. That is an option available to you. We want 195. Should be about that. But we will follow the GPS for this one. That's what's tuned in. And here we've got it on GPS nav, not VOR nav, although we'll use that if we do have to tune in an ILS. Let's see. Get rid of cautions. Let's get the left gen out and on. And we'll turn pitot heat on as we're rolling out. Last thing we're going to do, turn on heading mode here. That'll give us flight director cues. And I think that is good enough for us for now. One final thing that I should neglect, it's not going to matter for us. We're going up to flight level 240, but setting cabin altitude here is important. And then when we're once we've taken off, we'll turn on the cabin air. Teterboro traffic, .com 88, we're Learjet taxiing to runway 19er via Papa Lima. One thing to note as we taxi here, there is a nose wheel steering button that I have bound. I think it's bound to the tail hook, but check with I checked with Flysimware on that. But that will control the nose wheel steering. If you don't have it on, your nose wheel steering won't be engaged. In theory, we're supposed to disable that nose wheel steering as we begin our roll down the runway. So that's why I have that bound on my yoke. All right, so we're here to the hold short line. Let's get ready to go. We've got stall warning on, hydraulic pumps on. We're going to turn air ignition on. Fuel computers on. Everything else is on. Pitot heat can come on. Navigation is good. Our initial heading is bugged, heading 195. We've got everything set up here. We'll set up a speed climb once we get up there, although we'll probably fly it completely manually up to 2,000. It will not take us long to get to 2,000 feet. Radar, we can turn the weather radar on as well, so let's go ahead and bring that up. We'll set 40 miles. And it will display an image, so that's kind of nice. And then as we take off, let's arm the thrust reversers in case we have to do a rejected takeoff. Everything else, I think, is good, and I'm not even... So now that I'm on the right frequencies, we're ready to go. So as we roll out onto the runway, we're going to set flaps 8. Spoilers are all in. We're going to set about 96 and 1 power on. We'll be looking at the fan speed down here, just kind of gently coming up to it. Let's turn the lights on, strobes on, and give a call. Teterboro traffic. .com 88 is line up runway 19 for departure to the south, Teterboro. So let's roll out. Verify that we have the right runway. Can't really see, but it looks like it's good on Navigraph. And again, we're heading 180 to 900 feet and then climbing to 2,000 feet on the right-hand turn. Now, generally, after that, Teterboro will give you a higher altitude, 7, 8. I can't remember if they give you up to 17, but we'll probably clear ourselves up a little bit after that. But let's go get it. Just gently bring the throttle forward. We're going to look for about 96% and 1. We busted a little bit, but that's okay. And we'll release the brakes. Now keep an eye on the airspeed indicator. Airspeed's alive. It's 100 knots. 120. rotate. Then we're gonna just try to climb out around 160. So gear up. Flaps coming up. And we're climbing out past New York. And that's 1,000, so let's go ahead and make our turn now. TeterboroughTraffic.com 88. We're clear runway 19, departing out to the south. Last call, Teterboro. And we haven't flown this that tightly, and we're getting pretty fast too, so you're gonna have to bring out the speed. Luckily, no speed restriction that I know of, but it's very hands-on. That's the fun thing about this airplane, is flying it here. I'm busting the altitude. Is very hands-on, so it takes a little bit of practice. This is not an airplane I would think even an experienced pilot should hop into VATSIM on. You are going to be flying this airplane. So I'm going to go ahead and clear ourselves up to 17,000 feet. And we'll hold this heading and get direct to Biggie in a second. I'm going to get the automation set up. So we'll set 2,000... 210 knots, that's pretty good. We're going to... You have to make sure your altitude select. And then engage the autopilot. And then I will run the speed up. So we're in heading hold mode now. And we're going to climb up. Give it a little power to climb up. 17,000 here. So you can see how it could get very busy. But I do think that that's the best illustration of what's going on in the airplane and really why it's fun. It's more of an exercise than, say, flying a 737 where I press the autopilot button off the runway. And this is going to play into the descent as well. So right now we're good. Let's go ahead and do direct. Flight plan Biggie. Activate our direct. And now we can go into our nav. And again, no auto throttle here. It's generally pretty stable in the throttle. But you will have to kind of disengage, pitch the airplane how you want it to be pitched for your climb, and then, set up the mode that you want. So we can go to vertical speed mode here. And just try and get a little more speed on the climb out now. Alright, so as we climb out now, I'm going to set about 280 knots, change this back over to speed climb, and then give it some good power so we can keep up our ascent. Again, we're not going that high. We're going to go up to flight level 240 today. Before we make our descent into Washington. So why should you fly the Lear 35? We have other private jets, but I do think that in a very crowded add-on marketplace right now, this airplane stands out because of the steam gauge combination with a big, powerful jet engine. That's a cool combo. It's not one we have a ton of. It's a high-performance jet. It's a private jet that can kind of do whatever you need it to do. Medium range, so you can not quite do a transcontinental flight. You're not quite crossing the Atlantic. But you can do longer range flights. It takes pretty well to sim rate increase. Like, I've done 4x sim rate pretty well, which is always nice. And but generally speaking, I think the attractive thing for this plane is the workflow and the workload. It's not quite so heavy workload wise as a more classic airplane, as some of the prop liners. It's very capable physically and in performance for like flying on VATSIM. You're not going to be, always sitting around asking for weird SIDS and stars, asking for weird procedures because you can't do something. You can do everything the big jets are doing, the modern jets are doing. It's just going to take more work from you as the pilot. And that's, I think, a really cool thing that we haven't had in the sim quite yet. And there's a lot of depth you can go into. Again, there's, I think, some real Lear 35 manuals floating around. There's some historical manuals from P3D and previous versions of this plane from Flysimware that will have a lot of relevant information for, what speeds, what's your V speeds, how do you figure that out. and it's all based on your payload, how heavy you are, how much fuel you're carrying. So again, that's all pretty cool. There's you have different tanks. So if we look at our fuel tanks, we want to load the tip tanks first, or we want to load the wing tanks first, and then the tip tanks, and then the fuselage, because you can't actually access that. So it's a good detailed airplane. That's a little bit unique, especially as far as jets are concerned. It's relatively quick and easy to get running, but it is, a bunch of switches compared to something like the CJ4, which has fewer switches and an FMS. So for me, it's a good balance of that, especially when you throw in a Garmin touchscreen unit. Perfectly capable in VetSim. It's going to focus, put a lot on you as the pilot to figure out when you need to start down, do your top of descent, make sure you're hitting all your speed restrictions. You have to do that pilot stuff more than other airplanes, and I think that's cool. So it's a good workload level. That's the big thing I think that this brings to the table. The model also looks great, and I just think it fits a very needed place in the Microsoft flight simulator ecosystem. We're hitting our cruise now, 24,000 feet, flight level 240. Let's bop that into standard. And now we're going to make our quick trip down to Washington. We're making 392 knots across the ground. We'll be there in no time whatsoever. About 30 miles to Copes, another 25 to Medina, and then we're starting our descent. So again, we got to cross Clipper on the Clipper 3 at 12,000 feet. So we'll do a little rough calculation to back out where we should start down. But again, we want to be hitting Clipper at 12,000 feet. All right, so we're cruising along here. We're about 15 miles from Medina VOR. So if we had control online, I'd expect a descent clearance soonish. We're going to start down pretty close to Medina. We need about 50 miles before we hit Clipper to get down to 12,000. But we have plenty of performance to make it up, but it's just better to be on the early side than the late side when it comes to this stuff. And then descending into DCA. DCA is still running, looks like the river visual for runway 19, so that'll be fun in this plane. I'm going to pull up that approach real quick. And river visual, same as it ever was. We're going to go out to Fergie around there, 3,000. And we're going to follow the Potomac River descending, and then coming into land Washington, D.C. there. Should be a joy in this airplane. I haven't tried this before, first time on video. So we're going to go ahead and start down here, about 5 miles from Medina. And again, our new altitude is going to be 12,000 feet. So we really don't need to descend that aggressively. 1,500, 2,000 feet per minute, but we do end up moving fast here. That is the key. So I'm going to pull altitude hold. Just going to start pulling power. And we ought to start descending somewhat naturally. I'm going to bring it back to about 280 knots. Right about there. And then we should be good. One thing I don't know if I put on is our seatbelt signs. That would be good to have. They could just yell at me, but... So we're heading downhill about 2,000 feet per minute. And again, we just got to keep a good eye on this to make sure that Clipper, we hit Clipper at 12,000. Now, like I mentioned, this airplane doesn't have an auto throttle. I haven't found that that's too onerous. In the CRJ is the one that comes to mind, where Frankly, it's just hard to get the auto throttle to a stable place where it'll maintain a speed. It's always going to run away. This plane does a pretty good job, and you can pretty much give it at the high flight levels. When you're up at 430, you can give it almost everything it's got, and you're probably not going to overspeed the airplane. Generally, again, we set based on the fuel flow, is what I've heard from Slant Alpha. We want to have about 0.6, and if you set it at about 0.6, that'll be a good cruise for you. And that's kind of naturally where you find you end up. It's pretty stable, so I don't find that the auto throttle is something that I desperately miss with this airplane. And so you notice I made a mistake here. I didn't hit altitude arm here, and it flew right through the altitude. So again, there's a lot of small things. It's pretty intuitive, but you do need to be on your toes as a pilot. And it's something that I don't have a ton of seat time in this plane, and so I'm still getting used to it a little bit. Now we're in altitude hold at 12,000 here. We can resync our gyro. And now we're heading to Baltimore at 10,000 feet and 250 knots. So I'm going to bug 250 here. This bug doesn't actually do anything. But use that. I'm going to pull power, bring the speed back a little bit more, and then we're going to descend down to 10,000 feet. And arm the altitude select. And so here we've got DME to, or we've got a distance to our waypoint. This will be a DME when you have when you're in VOR mode. We're down at 10,000 feet now, so we'll bring the speed back leisurely to 250 knots, and then just try and balance that out. Alright, so you can see Washington off our nose. We are descending down to 3,000 feet. I'm going to go ahead and get us configured for landing. Otherwise, air ignition's going to go on. We're going to turn our thrust reversers. We're going to arm those. And we're going to plan for a flaps 40 landing with our extension speeds of 8 and 20, 200 knots, and then 40 at 150. And gear we can bring out at 200 knots too. So 200 knots is going to be the magic number. We're going to bring it back to 210 as we turn out here and get a little lower. We're currently running 250 now, but we'll take it up the Potomac a little bit up to Fergie, and then we will fly the river visual. Alright, so getting ready to shoot this approach, we're gonna bring I'm gonna bring the speed back to 180 knots. We're gonna bug the runway heading, which is going to be for runway 19, heading 187. I'm just gonna bug that here so we have it. We do have the RNAV waypoints programmed in, but we're gonna fly it visually just for fun. When we get out here, we're at 3,000 feet. We're going to bring the speed back. We're going to aim for about 180 knots before we turn hot on Fergie. And then begin the procedure. So we're leveling here. We've got altitude capture. We do have the Washington VOR tuned here, so we can get DME to that. It's a little bumpy down here. So we're here at 3,000 feet. And again, just keeping the throttle out. Watch the speed come down. I have that bugged. And then on the approach, we're going to be aiming for somewhere around 130, 120 to 130. I believe it's even a little higher, 135. And we'll bring a little power in and get ready to point ourselves towards Fergie. And then, so on our little base leg here, we'll go ahead and bring gear and flaps out. So I come up here, Fergie, direct, and now the airplane will fly it. So once we level out, we'll go gear, flaps, we'll give our first notch of flaps. We'll go flaps 8 for now, and then we'll bring it in once we're on the Potomac. Then I'm going to disengage the autopilot. We'll fly it manually. We may end up in the river, and if so, that'll be bad content, but that's okay. Just looking about 180 now. Gear out. And that's flaps 8. And we do have the river in sight, in case anyone is watching. And then let's pull up the last thing I should do is bring up the CTAF on 119.1. Here. And we're getting slow now. I'm going to go ahead and take control. Washington Traffic, .com 88. We are on the river visual runway 19, 3000 over Fergie. I'm just going to set us up a little bit. We need to maintain altitude for a minute here. And this plane's pretty responsive in hand flying. Again, I think the throttle controls are pretty smooth, which is a good thing. So now we're aiming for 1,800 feet over the chain bridge, right there. So I'm just going to keep not a ton of throttle in. And we're going to go flaps 20 just to help us stay kind of draggy. This plane, to be honest, I haven't done a ton of hand flying like this. So we'll be interesting to see how it handles. We do have speed brakes if we need them. And then thrust reversers. I have my Honeycomb Bravo set up to use the thrust reversers too. So we can do that. Okay. So we're moving quick here. Let's bring the speed back a little bit more. We're hitting 1,800 feet now. So let's slow the descent, because we're down just a hair early here. Chain bridge is still out in front of us. Just a little more power. Georgetown Reservoir is just beyond that. We're going to be at 1,500 feet there, roughly. And I can't see my DME. There, I can see my DME. We're still just a hair low. That's all right. At 4 DME, we want to be around 1,500 feet. So we're right on schedule here. And one last check. Gear is out, 3 green. We are in flaps 20 now. Once we're actually pretty slow. Let's bring the power out. And again, it's pretty stable. It doesn't take a ton of input, but it doesn't certainly feel like a fighter jet to control. Let me go ahead and go full flaps now. We're configured 1,500 feet. Georgetown Reservoir, we got Key Bridge up ahead. That's going to be 900 feet. And we want to stay to the right of all the important stuff. As we come down the river. Let's resume the descent now. And again, throttle control is just the one thing that I have to work a little bit on. But generally, it's pretty stable. It feels pretty good to hand fly here. Keep that going down. We're now a little high. So key bridge now. Let's make our right-hand turn. Down over all the other bridges. 900 feet there. Lincoln Memorial. We got the mall. And we have the runway in sight. So again, I want to kind of keep it around 130 knots. More shouldn't kill us, but less might. I basically bugged those 2 bugs, and if I keep the throttle, if I keep the speed between them, we should be okay. Again, you can do that a lot more precisely than I'm doing it. I'd recommend hunting down the P3D manual until the MSFS one comes out. And we're just, we're a little, I feel like we're a little low, but it's hard to tell in a low plane like this. We're actually a little high now. Low 120. Speed's good. And at DCA, we're just going to put it down on the markers. Not worry too much about it. And it floated a little. Alright, so our reversers are out. You got them old school Vigan style. And that'll do the bulk of the slowing as we get in. All right, we're down. Welcome, everybody, to Washington. We can disarm our thrust reversers, flaps up. Make sure our spoilers are in. And put our taxi lights on. And nose wheel steering can also come on. Washington traffic. .com 88 is clear. Runway 19, taxiing to the GA ramp via Kilo. Alright, so that was an awesome flight in the Flysimware Learjet. I will say that I'll enjoy the plane even more after that. It was really fun to fly in the river visual. It's fun to hand fly. But again, if you're looking for an airplane with a little more hands-on-ness than maybe your 737, but you still want to fly a jet, check out the Flysimware Lear 35. It is still early access. There's not a ton of detail. They don't have a MSFS manual out, but again, there's an old P3D version where you can get a lot of the performance stuff from. But yes, this is a really fun airplane, one I've been enjoying quite a bit. And if you're at all into the kind of the general aviation jet world, I think it's well worth your time. So thank you all for coming along. Hope you all enjoy the flight. Hope you all are flying cool places. We're in a really cool place in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And there's just so many cool airplanes out there for us to fly. Hopefully we'll get some more flying in, maybe a little controlling. Who knows? We will see. But till the next one, this has been VFR. Take it easy, y'all.